what is one bold prediction? I love these. What's one bold prediction that you have for this second half of the season, which by the way, actually starts next weekend?
Yeah, we're preempting this, aren't we, a little bit?
Mhm.
And we'll have to throw all of these to Lawrence as well,
Yes.
so that he's also got the potential to have some freezing cold takes as well.
Mhm.
This is one that, and having mentioned, I'm now
Bold. You have to be
very
bold.
have to be
You
bold.
can't be like,
Yeah.
McLaren's going to win the championship.
Well, yeah. I mean that would be the most milk toast.
McLaren's going to win the constructors title. That's
Yeah.
mine.
Well, I think anyone thinking that's not going to happen would be really
that would be bold.
I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because looking at it, I want to do one about race wins really, or podiums. What I wanted to say, but I just don't believe it is the problem. I wanted to be like, oh, Yuki will get his head back in the game and he'll be finishing top 5 by the end of the year. But I remember coming out the summer break last year making the same call about Sergio Perez, and let's face it, Perez was a more experienced driver than, is a more experienced driver than Yuki, and didn't get that there. Now this is where the British.
I want to make mine about wins too.
Yeah, you go if you want.
Nope.
But mine is going to throw the British bias allegations right back at me. but I have a reason. I think
you have to go.
I'm going to say
go.
I'm going to say Lewis Hamilton wins Monza would be my bold prediction. The reason I say it is because I don't think Lewis is where we need him to be at the moment, or where Ferrari need him to be at the moment in terms of fans enjoying the sport. But Lewis, more than any other driver in the time I've covered racing, he's a moments guy a lot of the time. Look at Silverstone last year. A moment presents itself. He steps up. It's one of the things that I think it was always easy to overlook when he was at Mercedes, because everyone said, well, he has the best car, but he really, in those moments, he was able to really turn, and Max does the same thing. It's the hallmark of the great drivers. And I think that, I could definitely see Lewis coming to a place like Monza, or one of the races later in the year, and just like he did in China, just something clicking and him winning the race and kind of flipping the narrative on its head. That is, and again, that's pretty bold. He's behind Charles by about 40 points. So I'll say that, and please do send all your British bias accusations at me at Nate Saunders F1.
Hold on, stand by. I'm trying to fire off a tweet as we speak. No, I'm kidding.
Do it. Yeah, I mean, it's a fair one. But that would be mine. I mean, I wanted it to be a big kind of brash one. I was going to say maybe Antonelli wins a race, but I'm not sure if he's going to be in that headspace.
I'm not sure how much I actually believe in my bold prediction.
But that's half the thing with these predictions. Sometimes you're like, am I just being bold for the sake of it? Like, am I just being like, oh, no, yeah, okay.
But I think that's what I'm. It has to be bold, so I'm going to say Williams is going to win a race before the season ends.
Oh wow, not even podium, just straight up win.
Yeah, I think there's going to be some race somewhere where there's some sort of like bizarre strategy, chaos, whatever. Maybe it's a rain race.
You've been watching too much of the F1 movie, Nicole, I think is the
I still haven't watched it yet.
Oh, have you not? Okay, well, I mean, I was going to say if you had been, you'd be like, absolutely can win. But
maybe I'll watch it. Let's not forget
Brazil last year, we had 2 Alpines on the podium.
I know.
No one would have called that at the summer break. So, sometimes these things sound crazy in the moment, and then something can happen.
Also, maybe I was just inspired by the hat that's above your head.
Yeah, which is one of my favorite hats. They've been wearing it a lot recently. It's their old kind of iconic, actually Saudi based colors from the late 70s.
Okay,
I like that one. But okay, if the bold prediction is Williams, which of the 2 guys wins?
Oh God, come on!
Because you've got a tough one there, because you got a race winner in Carlos Sainz, but you've also got Alex Albon, who I think has been
better.
Well, yeah, I think he's been one of the kind of the standout guys outside of that top 3 I mentioned earlier. And yeah, like
Sainz.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So a bit like me with Hamilton, you think like the experience would tell eventually.
I don't know.
Interesting. Well, look, I'm not going to hold you.
I'm just over here throwing darts, making bold predictions. You're making me.
If Williams win a race this year, Nicole, and Albon wins, I'm not going to turn around to you and be like, "Well, you didn't call Albon." Like, I'm not gonna clutch at straws like that. Like, I won't do that. I just thought it's interesting to see which one you'd pick. But
all right, yeah.
I mean, honestly, I would say as well, if Williams even get a podium this year, that would be one of my favorite results of all time in F1.
But let's remember, they got taken down to, what was it? They were 4th in Australia, and then they got the position taken away. They've not been far. They've really not been. When they're decent.
Yeah.
And if they continue to make changes,
Yeah, the problem, the frustration for Williams, but I think what's been so good about this season in Formula One is the everyone down from that top four. It's so competitive. I think I read,
Yes.
I think Motorsport.com had it the other day that whoever finishes last this year, it's going to be the highest last place finish in terms of points for
Yes.
for ages. Like there's never
Mhm.
been a season where the team in last has or will
So
have the
many
amount of points they're
points.
projected to get. So,
Yes.
you're looking at a year where all these teams are just making so many steps forward, and you do wonder, as those top teams look to 26, will
Hmm.
that gap actually really shift up before the end of the season? So
Hmm.
I'm I'm not gonna dismiss it as crazy, because I mean I just said Lewis Hamilton will win a race this year, but so stark to see what Lewis said during the weekend. I mean, I'll quickly read out what he said. First of all, after qualifying, knocked out in Q1, which of course we saw twice happen in Belgium 7 days before. He said the team has no problem. You can see the car is on pole. Obviously, a reference to Charles Leclerc. They probably need to change drivers. Now that was pretty shocking. I mean, when I'll go on to the Sunday comments after, but you were there on the Saturday, and we know Lewis can be incredibly downbeat, but this must have been shocking even for you, having covered Lewis and Formula One for so long, to hear him say something so stark and so frank like that at the end.
Yeah, you get so many versions of Lewis when you're in the media and you're talking to him over a season. And this is about as low as I've seen him, even during those Mercedes days. I mean, there was Qatar last year where he was really down on
Right.
himself and just, said that he's not capable of doing what he used to be able to do. But this one was clear. And actually, that last quote, they probably need to change a driver. We had about 3 or 4 people listen to it because he was mumbling a little bit and just said it kind of at the end of a sentence, just to make sure we got the quote right. And, check with other journalists as well and people who were right next to him, because we're in this scrum of journalists and it's sometimes quite hard to get a clean recording, just to check that it was. And that's what he said. So, I mean, we have seen this kind of Lewis before, but clearly there was something about this weekend, and I think it probably goes deeper than just the performance. Qualifying 12th, finishing 12th on a circuit where he's won 8 times is obviously not what Lewis Hamilton expects from himself. But there seems to be more going on beyond that. Because if you break it down and you start to make an argument for actually maybe it wasn't so bad, he was only 0.015 seconds off making Q3. And he wasn't that far behind Leclerc. I think we're talking a couple of tenths of a second, which has not been unusual this year at various circuits. So, he was really close to making Q3. And then because the conditions changed so much in Q3, wind picked up, cloud cover, all of a sudden that seemed to play to Ferrari. I reckon if he'd found those, 15 thousandths of a second, he would have been probably in contention, maybe not for pole. I don't think he was on Leclerc's level this weekend, but perhaps he would have got like a top 5, top 4. And then all of a sudden the weekend looks different, race goes differently. Although Ferrari had some problems in the race as well, but it just would have been a whole different, a different outlook. And the other thing I'd say about Lewis is that often we have seen him down and we have seen him beat himself up after sessions, especially immediately afterwards when he's in the TV pen and then he comes to us written journalists, that whatever is on his mind, he just says it. Like he has no filter at that stage, which in some ways is great as a journalist because you want to know what the drivers are feeling in that moment. But actually in previous years, pre-pandemic, we used to talk to Lewis about 3 or 4 hours after a race, once he'd had time to go and download information with his engineers, understand what went wrong or what went right. And then we'd get a much more considered view. So I do wonder whether if we'd done those media sessions just a couple of hours later, we might have got a different Lewis. And it's always hard to know exactly how deep these troughs are. But I mean, the obvious one, which we saw before and really did take some time to come out of, was 2021 after Abu Dhabi. I don't think we're there because that was something where it was all ripped away from him. But the concern here, and this is something that you've written about, Nate, on the site, is that he's lost a bit of belief in himself. And I think that's a concern, isn't it, going forward?
That is, yeah, and I think that's what stood out. And I mean, you're right. I think the thing about how close it was, I think that was on his mind as well. And let's not forget, this was Budapest as well. He's won there 8 times. So I think if Lewis was looking at the calendar a couple of months ago, he would have circled this race, and been like, Budapest is a place I can go into the summer break, and I can pull out a big result. And obviously, as we saw, Ferrari did have pace. Maybe could have won the race if things had gone differently. Certainly should have been on the podium. So that must have compounded quite a lot as well. And then what I thought was so telling was, because you're right about Lewis, and we have covered him enough. Sometimes that and in the piece that you referenced, I wrote that Lewis his pendulum does swing. I think his good moments are great and his bad moments are really bad, you know. And Toto Wolff even referenced that. He said even when we were winning, and I remember we used to joke, didn't we? Lewis would, he'd be, 200 points ahead in the championship or something, and his car would break down in Q1, and he'd come out and be like, "This is the worst day of my life," and stuff like that. And then he'd go and win it the next day. And part of it was almost the theatre of covering Lewis. It was that it was this roller coaster with him. And sometimes I think he's genuinely one of those guys that he does like to perform with his back against the wall a little bit. And it's one of the things that has always kind of helped him thrive. I guess it's a callback to his junior career and his rise through the ranks, etc. So I've always thought a little bit of that. What I was really surprised about was the fact that he then kind of doubled down on it on Sunday and kind of repeated it. He then, he was asked about it, and I'll read the quote again. Rachel Brooks from Sky Sports asked him about the comments. Do you feel any better? And he said, not particularly. When you have a feeling, you have a feeling. There's a lot going on in the background that's not great. Now that's interesting in itself. And like you said, I think it does speak to the fact there's more going on here. And again, like this is when I'd come back from the stag, and we had a bunch of people listening to this quote when he's like, no, I still love it. I still love the team. We were like, is he saying he still loves racing? He still loves the team. And he said, I look forward to coming back. Hopefully I will be back. Yeah. About the Dutch Grand Prix. So 3 quotes there, all of them very defeatist. And what's most surprising to me was, obviously I was in Spa, and that was one that you missed, and I was there. He came into Spa on Thursday in this defiant mood, saying, I'm not going to follow Seb Vettel and Fernando Alonso down the path of not winning a championship for Ferrari. That was him saying, I'm writing all these documents for Ferrari. I'm doing all this work. And in the space of a fortnight, less than that, because I mean, that's Thursday, and we're talking Sunday, the week later, he's sounding like this. So a remarkable turnaround. And we had, my brain did go back to him visiting Mercedes on the Sunday before Belgium, going back to familiar territory. You do wonder, it does just seem to me that something just has not clicked here for Lewis. It certainly hasn't on track. We've talked about him and his race engineer, the relationship doesn't seem as good as it could, but something hasn't clicked is kind of what the vibe seems to be here. And there's no other way to read into that, from those quotes, especially there's a lot going on in the background. Lewis does sometimes speak quite cryptically, but that stood out to me. And I just, if you're the biggest thing I thought, I don't want listeners to think we're just going to talk about Lewis Hamilton, because you've got 2 British guys here. I'm sure people will be violently thrashing at their keyboards at us. But I just wonder, Lawrence, like, if you're John Elkann and you've spent all of that money bringing Lewis Hamilton to the team, 60+ million pounds reportedly, maybe north of that with add-ons and bonuses and stuff like that. You didn't spend all that money to hear this after 14 races, did you? So you must wonder what's going through his mind seeing Lewis like that. And like you said, the point I made in the article was, fundamentally it sounds like Lewis has lost the belief that he can win the championship for Ferrari, which there must just be red flags all over the place.
Yeah, but I suppose they would have done a bit of due diligence on Lewis. He's a very high profile figure in the sport, and this does happen with Lewis. This does happen, at different stages in his career. And so I think with Lewis, you are getting this whole package, and you're also getting this driver who, and this was something that people at Mercedes said again and again, when he's scrabbling around in the midfield because the car's not good enough and it's not doing what he wants, it does tend to spiral downwards, or at least just not improve in the same way. When victories are on the line and it all changes slightly, then he does have this extra gear he can engage. I guess the big question right now is, can he still engage that in those kind of scenarios if the car is right? Or is this a fundamental thing where he's come up against Charles Leclerc, who we know is exceptional, especially over one lap, and he's actually realized, I can't quite match that, or I'm not sure how I'm going to match that. I need to figure out something new. And then he's got all of the changes that have happened. I mean, the way one clear thing which he's talked about is the brakes, and the way that the Ferrari uses engine braking more than the Mercedes in terms of slowing the car down. And I think he's having to relearn the way to drive. And there is no endless testing anymore in Formula One. You have to do a lot of your your testing and your understanding of the car in public eye and in races. And I think that's been quite bad. But then, all we have to do, and this is so true of Lewis in general, all we have to do is rewind about 3 or 4 races, and it was a different story. Lewis did appear to be making progress. There was better qualifyings versus Charles Leclerc. So I think to get kind of worked up about this one result, these single comments, it is too soon. There is now a summer break. He has a chance to reset, and it's how he comes back in Zandvoort and also Monza, which hopefully will be a big boost for him driving in front of the Italian fans. That will be telling. If we get more of the same and it continues through to the end of the year, then yeah, I think Ferrari are looking at it and say, hang on. But right now, Ferrari also have to look at themselves and say, well, we haven't exactly given this 7-time world champion, a guy who has proven again and again and again how good he is during his career. We haven't given him a car. And in fact, we haven't given any of our drivers a car to win a championship since about 2008. And so, you know, Ferrari have to look at themselves as well. I don't think they can turn around and point the finger at Lewis because, you know, that's just one of the many issues going on at Ferrari. And then just go back to that Zandvoort quote where he said, I look forward to coming back. Hopefully I will be back. The way it actually worked out, because I was kind of one person back in that scrum of media, was he was asked, but you're going to be back in Zandvoort, right? You know, just to confirm. And he said, I look forward to coming back. But he said it so quietly, the person that asked the question said, sorry, what did you say? And he said, hopefully I'll be back, yeah. So it's almost like that was just an additional bit on. And I don't know whether I don't think he meant it to sound like, oh, I might not come back, you know, or hopefully it's going to happen.
Maybe he's saying, hopefully Lewis will be back, you know, the Lewis, Lewis of old, maybe, yeah, I get you.
And this is the thing when he gets pulled up on these things like, sorry, what did you mean by that or whatever? And he's just like, what I just said. So it's really hard sometimes to get the true meaning of what he's saying out of it. And also there will be elements which perhaps he can't help but hint up because he's frustrated, but he knows he can't go into the details of, you know, what's going on behind the scenes at Ferrari. And, you know, it may be that some of the changes he wants to be made to the car, I'm speculating here, have not been made, but he's been very clear that he's got a bunch of ideas that he wants, especially for 2026, implemented. And so, you know, that's also going on at the moment. So that's why I think, you know, you could read that there's a lot going on in the background. He could just be saying in 2026, there's a lot going on in the background and it's still not exactly to my liking, but we're getting there, you know, but he just wouldn't elaborate because he was in such a bad mood on the Sunday. Yep. So again, I mean, I want to reserve a bit of judgment here. I don't want to really kind of go in on Lewis and Ferrari at this stage. And not least because, I mean, I think we're going to talk about this as well, but Ferrari have actually made a step. You know, you can look at Ferrari Sunday and say, didn't it all go wrong? But they had a car on pole. You know, that's not been the case at any point this year other than the China sprint. And the rear suspension change that they made in Spa, and drivers, you know, Ferrari, I've said that it has helped. There still seems to be a fundamental issue with that car, is that they can't run it at the right height, that it's happiest at, that it's producing the most performance without wearing out the plank, which is what happened in the Chinese Grand Prix. And that's a problem that they still seem to be solving and probably running out of time with. But there has been progress. And, you know, you look at other teams, you look at Mercedes, they've had to completely revert their suspension to an older, you know, system. So it's not, you know, it looks bad on paper. When the quotes come out, it looks really bad. You know, it's easy to get tied in on all this. But if you actually look at Ferrari's season as a whole, starting point was well below what they expected, well below, you know, what they probably should be doing. But from then, it hasn't been this kind of awful trajectory. And there have been reasons, and they are partially understood at least. So, yeah, I want to just kind of give a little bit of before we go, like Lewis's, you know, career over, Ferrari, forget it for another however many years. I want to put a bit of block on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's wonderfully put, actually. And I think as well, like when one team dominates, like we're seeing this year, it turns the attention of the other teams up a bit, doesn't it? Because naturally, you're not fighting for wins; you're fighting for third place a lot of the time, which Ferrari are doing, and they are best of the rest. They're second position. You mentioned Charles Leclerc. Obviously, I don't want to talk just about Lewis. I think that is what has made Lewis's kind of season seem more stark, is the fact that Charles is just driving so well at the moment. That lap, I mean, we talked about me being on the Stag. We weren't in a pub that was showing it, and I looked at my phone all weekend. I was following it, and suddenly I was like, Charles on pole. I was like, what on earth? Like, you know, what happened there? You know, for that to happen, I was convinced that my app must have been broken. So it was one of those great things where when you're a bit detached from the weekend, it can almost elevate how special a lap is. You mentioned about Lewis maybe not having the feedback, or not having his feedback listened to. I certainly think it would be ridiculous and remarkable if Ferrari weren't listening to it, and you know that definitely was hinted at. Charles was also kind of hinting at the fact, and he has before, that maybe some of the suggestions he makes during the race don't get listened to. His radio during the race was quite remarkable. He then kind of rode that back. We talked a lot about post-race comments from Lewis. Charles is quite interesting. You know, when the pace just disappeared, I mean, it went from being in contention to win the race, then in contention for a podium, and then suddenly kind of a distant fourth out of nowhere. In the race, it seemed like something's happened here on the setup. He's lost the sweet spot. Ferrari later pointed to a chassis issue. I mean, you've already mentioned the struggles they've had with the ride height and stuff. So, those things can happen. It was frustrating